everyone, and welcome back to the Wisdom by Harry YouTube channel. My name is Harry.
And I'm Mary. We're so excited to have you here today for another fascinating episode.
You know, history has these flashpoints, right? Moments where everything just feels incredibly tense.
Absolutely.
And February 2019, between India and Pakistan, that was definitely one of those periods. We saw military actions, lots of different stories popping up.
A really volatile time.
For sure. So for this deep dive, we've gathered various accounts to try and, really understand what unfolded, what narratives took hold, and how it all fits into the bigger, complicated picture between these two nations.
Yeah, the goal is really to piece together those key events, look at the different angles we've got from the sources, and understand the context of India-Pakistan relations right then.
Exactly. Our mission today, if you like.
What's really striking, I think, is just how fast everything happened. It was like dominoes falling after that one big initial incident.
Totally. Let's start there with what really ignited this whole thing. The suicide attack in Pulwama. That was February 14th, 2019.
A horrific event. It targeted a convoy, India's Central Reserve Police Force in Kashmir.
And the cost was just terrible. Over 40 paramilitary soldiers lost their lives.
And almost immediately, the question was, who did it? Responsibility was claimed by Jaish-e-Mohammed, JEM, a terror group band operating out of Pakistan.
Right, a group with a history in the region, unfortunately.
Yeah, and the international reaction was pretty swift. The U.S., for example, came out quite strongly.
What did they say?
They urged Pakistan to stop, providing support in safe havens for terrorist groups on its soil. A clear message.
A very direct call. But Pakistan's reaction?
They strongly rejected any link to the Pulwama attack. Their position was essentially, show us proof through an investigation before you blame us.
Okay, so right away you have these two very different official stories forming. That's key.
Absolutely crucial. And the fallout wasn't just political or military.
No, it spilled over, didn't it? I remember reading about sports being affected.
Yeah, exactly. In India, they actually blocked broadcasts of the Pakistan Super League, the cricket league. That shows you how deep the public feeling ran after the attack.
Wow. It really hit a nerve across the board.
And this attack, while it was a specific, terrible event, it didn't happen in a vacuum. It sits within that whole long, tangled history of the Kashmir conflict. We should probably circle back to that later.
Good point. But the immediate direct consequence was, military action from India.
That's right. On February 26th, India launched airstrikes. The Indian Air Force, the IAF, hit what they said was a Jamem training camp.
And this wasn't in disputed territory. This was in Pakistan proper, right?
Aye.
In Balakot, Khyber Pakhtunkhwa province.
Precisely. And that's the really significant part here. It was the first time since the 1971 war that Indian military aircraft had actually crossed the line of control, the recognized border, to conduct a strike inside Pakistan.
That's a huge deal. A major shift.
Definitely. And the initial reports coming out of India about the strike's impact, they were quite something.
Yeah, some sources were claiming, a very high number of militants killed? Like 350 or something?
Around that number, yeah. Though, it's really important to say, those figures were pretty quickly disputed. There was a lot of skepticism.
And wasn't there also a slightly different line from someone in the Indian government?
Yes. Interestingly, an Indian minister suggested the main goal wasn't necessarily mass casualties, but more about sending a strong warning signal to Pakistan.
Okay, so even within the Indian narrative, maybe some differing messages there adds complexity.
It does, and then you had reports coming out, including from Al Jazeera, looking at satellite images and sending reporters to the site.
Right, what did they find?
Well, their reporting indicated that the madrasa, the religious school at the location, seemed pretty much undamaged, largely intact, which, contradicted those initial claims of a destroyed camp.
That really throws the whole thing into question, doesn't it? The difficulty of getting reliable information right after something like this happens.
It absolutely underscores that challenge. Verifying claims is incredibly hard when national narratives and high stakes are involved. You really need to look at multiple sources.
No kidding. And things didn't stop there. The escalation continued fast. The very next day, February 27th, Pakistan response.
They did. Their actions included reportedly shooting down 2 Indian fighter jets, and they captured one of the pilots.
Okay, and again, the information gets murky here too, right? Conflicting accounts.
Yeah, somewhat. Indian officials did acknowledge losing an aircraft in Kashmir. They reported, sadly, that 2 pilots and a civilian died in a crash, but they didn't explicitly confirm, at least initially, that Pakistan had shot it down.
Got it. and the immediate result on the ground, or rather in the air, massive disruption.
Huge disruption to civilian life. Pakistan completely closed its airspace to commercial flights, and then several airports in northern India had to shut down operations too.
It really shows how quickly these military actions can ripple outwards and affect ordinary people, even far from the immediate zone.
Definitely. It's not just contained to the military sphere.
So let's talk about the captured pilot, Group Captain Abhinandan Varthaman. He became, well, a central figure in all this.
He really did. His plane, a MiG-21 Bison, was shot down inside Pakistani territory. Reports said about 7 kilometers from the line of control.
And his capture, obviously, became huge news. There were videos released.
Yes, videos of him being questioned emerged. And despite, the incredibly tough situation he was in, he came across as remarkably composed.
Yeah, when he made that comment about the tea.
Right, exactly. The tea is fantastic. That line just exploded online, became this massive meme.
Yeah, I remember that. And in India, he was instantly seen as a hero, a symbol of resilience.
Absolutely. And funnily enough, even his mustache, that distinctive style, became popular. People called it the Varthaman style.
Seriously, it was used in ads, I think I read.
Yeah, some companies apparently picked up on it. It's amazing how these symbols emerge in times like these.
It really is. And there's another, maybe stranger, detail about a museum.
Reports suggest the Pakistan Air Force Museum in Karachi actually has a display, now a statue related to him, and supposedly parts of his aircraft wreckage.
Wow, that's quite something. A stark reminder of the human element caught up in these state-level conflicts.
It is, and it's worth noting his background, too. He wasn't just any pilot. He'd flown the Su-30 MKI, a more advanced jet, before the MiG-21.
Oh, interesting.
And his father was also a high-ranking air marshal in the IAF, flew MiG-21s himself, actually, so a real aviation family.
Deep roots in the Air Force. And Varthaman himself was later decorated for his actions, wasn't he?
Yes, he received the Veer Chakra, which is a very significant gallantry award in India.
It really puts a face, a personal story onto these big geopolitical events. Highlights the individual risks.
It does. It's a crucial perspective.
Okay, let's shift back to the claims and counterclaims about the actual dogfight. India maintained that they shot down a Pakistani F-16, right?
That was their firm assertion, yes, that during the aerial engagement on February 27th, they successfully downed an F-16.
But then came a direct contradiction. A major news outlet, Dawn, reported something different based on U.S. sources.
That's right. Their report cited senior U.S. defense officials. Apparently, the U.S. had conducted an inventory count of Pakistan's F-16 fleet after the incident. This was reportedly done at Pakistan's invitation, possibly as part of the end-user agreement for the planes.
And the result of that count?
According to the report, all of Pakistan's F-16s were accounted for. None were missing, which directly contradicts the Indian claim.
That's a pretty significant piece of information. Did it specify which F-16s were counted?
Yeah, the report also mentioned input from Richard Abalafia, an aerospace expert, who noted that the U.S. inspection likely covered all of Pakistan's F-16s, including ones they'd acquired secondhand from Jordan because they'd fall under the same U.S. monitoring agreements.
Okay. And did the U.S. government say anything officially about the F-16 use?
Well, the U.S. Embassy in Islamabad put out a statement saying they were seeking information about whether Pakistan might have misused the F-16s. Using them offensively could potentially violate the terms of sale.
So, investigating a possible breach of the agreement. But what was Pakistan's official line on using F-16s in that engagement?
Pakistan consistently denied using F-16s to shoot down the Indian MiG-21. They maintained their actions were purely defensive.
So you're left with these two completely opposing narratives about a key event in the aerial battle. India says they shot down an F-16. U.S. officials reportedly say all Pakistani F-16s were accounted for. Pakistan denies using F-16s offensively.
Exactly. It perfectly illustrates the fog of war and the challenge of establishing confirmed facts, especially when advanced military tech and national pride are involved. Getting a universally accepted truth is, well, extremely difficult.
It certainly seems that way. Okay, let's widen the lens a bit now to the diplomatic fallout and international reactions. What happened there?
Well, on the diplomatic front, Pakistan recalled its high commissioner, its top diplomat, from India. They also kept their airspace closed for transit flights for quite some time, extending the initial closure.
Right. And internally within Pakistan, were there other actions taken?
Yes, we saw Pakistani authorities launching a crackdown. They targeted groups they said had links to banned organizations, including GEM. This involved arrests, seizing assets, taking over seminaries and mosques linked to these groups.
Okay, so some internal action, ostensibly against militant groups. What about the wider world?
Internationally, there were widespread calls for calm, for de-escalation. Saudi Arabia, for instance, urged both sides to pull back. The UN Secretary General also expressed deep concern about the rising tensions.
Standard calls for restraint, basically.
Pretty much. But within India, there was also a political dimension playing out.
How so?
The main opposition party, the Congress Party, criticized Prime Minister Modi. They accused him of essentially using the Pulwama attack and the subsequent military actions for political gain, especially with elections coming up.
The domestic politics angle. Always present.
Always. Meanwhile, Pakistan's Prime Minister Imran Khan made an offer. He said Pakistan would act on any actionable intelligence India provided about Pulwama.
So putting the ball back in India's court, asking for evidence.
Kind of. And he coupled that with a call to give peace a chance. At the same time, reflecting the tension, Pakistan's foreign minister had to postpone a trip to Japan. The regional situation was just too sensitive.
Makes sense. Were other countries trying to actively mediate?
There were signs of that. Turkey's President Erdogan publicly welcomed the pilot, Varthaman's, release, and the Crown Prince of the UAE reportedly made phone calls to both Prime Minister Modi and Prime Minister Khan, trying to help defuse the situation.
So some back-channel efforts likely happening.
Almost certainly. And one other factor we absolutely have to mention is social media.
Oh yeah. How did that play in?
Unfortunately, as often happens in crises, it was awash with misinformation. Fake news, doctored images, rumors spreading like wildfire on both sides.
Which only pours fuel on the fire, right?
Yep.
Makes everything more tense, harder to figure out what's real.
Precisely. It really amplified the tension and probably made rational responses even harder. It highlights that modern challenge. Instant communication can be a double-edged sword in a crisis.
Definitely. Okay, so finally, just to wrap this specific period up, let's briefly put it back into that larger context you mentioned earlier, the Kashmir conflict.
Right, because these events, dramatic as they were, didn't just appear out of nowhere. They're fundamentally linked to the long, painful history of the dispute over Kashmir between India and Pakistan.
A dispute that goes back decades, involving multiple wars, countless skirmishes.
Exactly. It's a core issue, a territorial conflict with deep historical roots. And you have this complex situation on the ground where different areas of the former princely state are administered by India, by Pakistan, and even a part by China.
Each with their own narratives, their own claims.
Absolutely. So understanding that 70-plus year backdrop is really essential to make sense of why tensions can flare up so quickly and intensely, like they did in February 2019.
So if we're summarizing this intense period, we start with the shock of the Pulwama attack.
Then India's unprecedented airstrike in Balakot, crossing the border.
Followed by Pakistan's response, the aerial combat, the captured pilot becoming this huge symbol.
And throughout, these sharply contrasting narratives and claims, especially about Balakot's impact in the F-16 shootdown.
Right, lots of international calls for calm, diplomatic maneuvering.
And that very real human story of the pilot, alongside the disruptive impact on civilians and the dangerous spread of misinformation online.
It really was a whirlwind few weeks, and reflecting on it all, you're left thinking about the bigger picture. What are the long-term consequences for these two nuclear-armed neighbors? Their relationship is already so complex.
Yeah, and what role can or should international players have in trying to manage crises like this when they erupt? How do you navigate situations where the basic facts themselves are so fiercely disputed?
It really drives home the complexities, doesn't it? The multiple layers, the competing perspectives. There are no easy answers here. Something definitely for all of us to keep pondering.